Ancient Plague Crisis. Image a city at the peak of its power, a jewel of the ancient world. Picture the sun glinting off marble columns, the air alive with 1,000 voices haggling in the marketplace, the scent of spices and baked bread, the rumble of chariot wheels on stone. This was a civilization that believed it had tamed the world, that its legions were invincible, its gods benevolent, and its future limitless. Life, for all its daily struggles, had a rhythm, a certainty. The powerful feasted in their villas, the merchants counted their coins, and the slaves toiled in the background, the silent, invisible engine of an empire. But then something changes. It begins not with a bang, but with a whisper. A cough in a crowded tenement. A strange fever on the docks, brought in on a ship from some forgotten port. At first, no one pays it any mind. Sickness is a part of life. But this is different. The cough becomes a desperate, racking gasp. The fever becomes a fire that consumes from within, leaving its victims delirious and trembling. A dark, ugly rash blooms across the skin, a terrifying mark of the invisible enemy now walking the streets. Within a week, the whispers become a scream. The disease doesn't just kill, it devours. It moves with a speed and ferocity that defies all reason. One day a man is healthy, complaining about the price of grain. The next, his family is sealing his room, a miasma of death already seeping from under the door. The city's rhythm is broken, replaced by the tolling of funeral bells that can no longer keep up, and then an even more terrifying sound: silence. The markets empty, the forums fall quiet. Neighbors eye each other with suspicion, seeing not a friend, but a potential carrier of death. Every shadow holds a threat, every breath of wind a potential poison. The city's greatest minds are utterly, catastrophically helpless. The physicians, men of learning and status, cling to their ancient theories. They speak of an imbalance in the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. They prescribe bleedings that only weaken the sick and purges that hasten their demise. They burn foul-smelling herbs, believing the disease is a miasma, a bad air that can be driven away by a stronger stench. But the smoke and incense do nothing but mingle with the ever-present smell of decay. When their science fails, the people turn to their gods. Grand processions are held, pleading with Jupiter or Apollo to lift the curse. They sacrifice hundreds of their finest animals on sacred altars, the smoke rising to a heaven that seems deaf and indifferent. But the plague only worsens. The gods, it seems, have abandoned them. This is when true terror sets in. The social contract, the very fabric of civilization, begins to unravel. The rich are the first to flee, packing their villas onto carts and heading for the countryside, often carrying the pestilence with them, seeding it in the villages they pass through. The city guards desert their posts. The aqueducts fall into disrepair. The bodies begin to pile up in the streets because there is no one left to bury them. Family turns against family. A son will abandon his ailing father. A mother will refuse to tend to her feverish child, paralyzed by a fear that is stronger than love itself. It is a complete societal collapse, a descent into a primal state where the only goal is to survive until the next sunrise. Death is no longer a distant concept. It is a house guest that refuses to leave. It is in every home, from the most opulent patrician estate, where masters lie dying on silken cushions, to the squalid slave quarters, where bodies are simply left to rot. And it is here, in this crucible of despair, that our story truly begins. In one of these grand death-stricken households, where the master of the house, a man of immense power and wealth, lies gasping his last breaths, surrounded by helpless physicians and weeping family members. They have tried everything. They have prayed to every god. They have spent a fortune on useless cures. They are now simply waiting for the end. In this room, amidst the wealth and the fear, there is a figure who is usually unnoticed, a slave. Someone considered property, a tool, less than human. They are there to fetch water, to clean up the filth of the disease, to be an invisible presence in the face of overwhelming tragedy. They have no power, no voice, no status. They cannot flee the city. They are chained to the fate of their masters. But this individual possesses something that the physicians, priests, and patricians do not. It might be a memory, a piece of forbidden knowledge, or a spark of radical observation. As they watch their captors, the very people who own their life, succumb to the same fate as everyone else, a choice presents itself: to remain silent and invisible, or to step out of the shadows and do the unthinkable. In a world brought to its knees, where all the established power and wisdom has proven to be utterly worthless, hope will come from the most unlikely and forgotten corner of society.
Block 2. Slave's Radical Cure. The air in the master's villa is thick with failure. The physicians have packed their useless instruments, muttering about divine wrath and incurable miasmas. The family huddles in a far corner, their faces masks of grief and terror, waiting for the inevitable death rattle. But as the last physician leaves, the slave steps forward. Imagine the sheer audacious courage this takes. In this rigid social hierarchy, a slave did not speak unless spoken to. To offer unsolicited advice, especially on a matter of life and death that had stumped the greatest minds, was to risk a brutal flogging or even execution for impertinence. Yet, this individual, seeing the finality in his master's eyes, takes that risk. He or she approaches the deathbed, not with a prayer or a platitude, but with a proposal. A radical, desperate, last-ditch effort. But what was this cure? History, as we will see, has a vested interest in not recording the specifics, but we can piece together the most compelling possibilities. The first, and perhaps most romantic, is the idea of ancestral knowledge, a secret carried across continents in chains. This slave may have been captured from a land the empire considered barbaric, a forested region in Germania, the plains of Scythia, or the deserts of Nubia. In these lands, far from the grand libraries and formal medical schools, people had a different kind of knowledge, one passed down through generations of oral tradition, a knowledge of roots, of barks, of leaves. They knew the willow bark that could break a fever, the potent antiseptic properties of a certain moss, or the specific flower that, when brewed into a tea, could calm the violent spasms of the sick. This was knowledge the empire's physicians would have dismissed as peasant superstition. The slave, seeing the symptoms that baffled the learned men, recognized them from the stories of his grandmother. He knew of a poultice that could draw the heat from the skin, a bitter tonic that could fight the infection from within. His cure wasn't magic. It was a science his masters were simply too arrogant to recognize. A second, equally powerful possibility is that the cure wasn't about a secret ingredient, but about a revolutionary idea born of pure, unclouded observation. While the physicians were busy consulting ancient texts, the slave was living in the reality of the plague. Their daily tasks, cleaning, cooking, fetching water, gave them a unique vantage point. Perhaps they noticed that in the wing of the house where a specific pungent cleaning herb was used to scrub the floors, the sickness spread less rapidly. Or maybe they observed that the families who drew their water from a particular upstream well remained healthy, while those downstream fell ill, intuiting a connection long before the concept of waterborne pathogens existed. It could have been something as simple as noticing that the sick, when isolated in a well-ventilated room away from the rest of the family, had a slightly better chance of survival. This wasn't a remedy from a bottle, but a radical protocol. It was the application of logic and reason in a world consumed by fear and superstition. The slave saw a pattern that everyone else, blinded by their own preconceived notions, had completely missed. This leads to the third, and perhaps most impactful explanation: a radical approach to hygiene and care. In an age where the sick were often crowded together for comfort, our slave might have insisted on the opposite: strict, merciless isolation. They would have demanded that all linens, clothes, and utensils used by the sick be boiled in water, an act that would have seemed bizarre and wasteful. They might have insisted on washing hands with vinegar or lye after any contact with the afflicted. They would have become a tyrant of cleanliness in a world wallowing in filth. Each of these actions, so fundamental to us now, would have been revolutionary. They weren't just treating a person, they were fighting an invisible enemy, breaking the chain of transmission they couldn't see but somehow understood. Whatever the method, the master, with nothing left to lose, agrees. The slave goes to work. They administer the bitter herbal tea, or they move the master to a clean, sunlit room, or they begin their relentless regimen of boiling and scrubbing. And then the miracle happens. The fever, which had raged for days, finally breaks. The labored breathing eases. The color begins to return to the master's face. It's a slow, agonizing process, but it is undeniably a recovery. The slave's methods, born of forgotten wisdom or brilliant insight, work. The cure is then applied to the rest of the household, and they too begin to mend. The home that had been a tomb is suddenly filled with the impossible sound of hope. The irony is staggering. The person with the least freedom, the individual legally defined as property, has become the ultimate giver of life. They hold the power to save or let die the very people who own them. This act of healing is also an act of profound, earth-shaking subversion. It proves that wisdom is not the sole property of the elite, that courage can be found in the most oppressed, and that a single forgotten person can change the course of destiny, even if history later decides to forget them.
History's erasure. So, the slave becomes a hero. They save their master's family, and, perhaps, as the knowledge of their methods quietly spreads, they save a part of the city. In a just world, this person's name would be etched in stone. Songs would be sung of their bravery, and their story would be told for generations as a testament to the fact that heroism can emerge from anywhere. But we don't know their name. We don't have their song. Their story is a ghost, a whisper of what might have been. And the reason for this is as chilling as the plague itself. The hero's very existence was an inconvenient truth. His story wasn't just forgotten, it was likely actively suppressed, buried under the weight of a social order that could not afford to acknowledge it. Let's dissect the motives behind this historical erasure. First and foremost, to celebrate a slave as a savior would be to shatter the foundational myth of the ruling class. Ancient societies, particularly those built on slavery, were predicated on a rigid hierarchy believed to be natural and divinely ordained. The patrician, the nobleman, the master, he was on top because he was inherently better, smarter, stronger, more civilized, closer to the gods.
The slave was at the bottom because they were considered inherently inferior. This was the ideology that justified the entire brutal system. Now, introduce a plague that the master class, with all its wealth, education, and divine favor, is powerless against. Then, introduce a slave who, through superior intellect, observation, or cultural knowledge, succeeds where they failed. This single act demolishes the pyramid. It suggests that intelligence and worth are not tied to social status. This is not just an inconvenient idea, it is a dangerous one. It's a spark of revolution. Preserving the social order was paramount. The institution of slavery, the engine of the empire's economy, depended on the complete dehumanization of millions of people. Slaves were tools, property, livestock with the ability to speak. To give one a name, a story, a legacy as a hero is to give them a human face. And once you acknowledge the humanity of one, you are forced to confront the humanity of them all. If Slave was a brilliant healer, what other hidden talents lay dormant in the millions toiling in the mines, fields, and kitchens? It's a question the powerful cannot allow to be asked. So, the story must be neutralized. The master, having recovered, is faced with a choice. He could publicly credit his slave, an act that would bring shame upon himself for being so helpless and upend the social norms he benefits from. Or he could rewrite the narrative. This is how the erasure happens. It's not always a dramatic burning of scrolls. It is often a quiet, insidious process of retelling. The master might grant the slave their freedom, a seemingly generous reward, but one that comes with an unspoken condition of silence and exile. The slave is sent away, their story disappearing with them. Then the official account is crafted. The family's survival is attributed to a different cause. Perhaps the master, in his feverish delirium, received a divine vision from a god who told him which herbs to use. Or maybe he claims that he, with his superior constitution, simply fought off the disease through sheer force of will. A more subtle version might be that a loyal servant simply followed the master's brilliant instructions. The slave's agency is erased, and they are reduced once again to a mere tool, an instrument of the master's own genius. Within a generation, this revised version becomes the accepted truth. The family's honor is preserved. The social order is secure. The slave is forgotten. This one hypothetical story serves as a powerful symbol for the countless real stories that have been lost to the biases of history. History is almost always written by the victors, the powerful, and the literate. The voices of the oppressed, the enslaved, the conquered, and often of women are overwhelmingly absent from the official record. For every hero whose name we know, how many thousands of others performed acts of equal or greater courage, ingenuity, and compassion, only to have their deeds stolen or ignored by a society that couldn't handle the truth of who they were. This forgotten slave challenges our very definition of a hero. It forces us to look in the margins and the silences of history, to question the narratives we've been handed down, and to wonder about the genius that was stamped out and the wisdom that was dismissed as superstition. The greatest tragedies in history aren't just the lives that were lost, but the stories that were never told. What does this forgotten tale tell us about our own understanding of history and heroes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you're fascinated by the hidden corners of history that challenge your perspective, subscribe to Full of Mind for more.